Joining me now is Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Tsirkin. Also with me is legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach. Julie, I want to start with you on the Hill. Congressman Khanna and Massey, who are behind the bill to force the release of the Epstein files, they were both on Meet the Press with Kristen this weekend, as we just played. Congressman Massey, in particular, has been at odds with fellow Republicans, including Speaker Johnson, over this bill. Can we expect that fight to heat up, even though the House isn't expected to be back for quite a while?
I think it depends, Gabe, on what they hear, if anything, from their constituents back home. We already saw an effort to try and corner Congressman Keith Self, for example, in Texas over the weekend, and he kind of muscled his way out of that. But I think when it comes to this issue, it is definitely not going away. When it comes to somebody like Thomas Massey, he's been at odds with Speaker Johnson and the president outside of this issue for months. But it's not just him, right? There are other Republicans, ones that leadership cannot ignore, that keep wanting to bring this to the forefront, not only in the House, but also in the Senate. And our own Kristen Welker questioned Massey and Khanna on what their endgame here is. Take a listen.
Why is it painful for Mike Johnson to call a vote on this? And it's, you know, the American people deserve this, regardless of what the political ramifications are for the speaker. This is going to hurt Republicans in the midterms. The voters will be apathetic if we don't hold the rich and powerful accountable.
House Republicans insist upon the release of all credible evidence and information related to Epstein in any way. But we are also insisting upon the protection of innocent victims. And our concern is that the Massey and Khanna discharge petition is reckless in the way that it is drafted and presented.
Now, there are protections in that resolution, but Gabe, as you know well, the Speaker has the power to do anything. He could by himself draft a piece of legislation that would force the administration's hand on releasing these files with whatever contours and redactions he'd like, but he isn't. And he is not putting an effort like this on the floor by himself. It is why you have Massey now going around gathering signature. He needs 218 signatures to be able to force Johnson's hand and put this on the floor. And I suspect over the break, with pressure back home especially, this issue is not going away anytime soon.
You know, Julie, the big sell for this August break, it was supposed to be the so-called big, beautiful bill, right? You know, we just played Vice President J.D. Vance in Ohio talking about it a little earlier in the broadcast, but is anyone listening?
Well, that's also the big question. And, you know, as I'm having conversations with Democrats behind the scenes, especially, something that kind of bubbled to the surface is all this talk about Epstein taking away from your messaging on the devastating portions of that bill, on Medicaid cuts, on food stamp benefits going away, and all of these cuts that Democrats were talking about before the bill was signed into law. And the bottom answer to that is we can chew gum and walk at the same time. We can keep this issue at the forefront, which they believe is nothing but a win-win for them, trying to drive this message home of transparency. An issue, by the way, that, yes, on one hand, Speaker Johnson and others are right. Democrats had 4 years to release them, and they didn't, these files. But the difference here is that the president spent his campaign talking about this and campaigning on this issue. So for Democrats, they're going to keep talking about Epstein. They're, in fact, actually planning a few stops in Republican districts to talk about that issue.
Julie Tsirkin, live for us on Capitol Hill. Julie, thank you. I want to turn now to Gary. And look, Gary, before this most recent fallout over the Epstein files, Ghislaine Maxwell, she was appealing her conviction before the U.S. Supreme Court. What's the basis of that appeal, and what are her lawyers arguing?
So Maxwell's attorneys are arguing that she should have never been prosecuted in New York because she says she has a non-prosecution agreement in Florida, and she says that should apply across the country to every U.S. attorney's office. Now, it's an open question as to whether or not she actually has a non-prosecution agreement in Florida because she never signed anything down there. Her name's not listed in the non-prosecution agreement of Jeffrey Epstein from 2008, and she is not involved in the agreement in any way. So that's certainly up for the Supreme Court justices to decide. But this is not something that's going to be decided for many months before it even gets to oral arguments at that stage.
So when it comes to the interview, two-day interview she had last week with Todd Blanche, we know that she was given limited immunity for the information she gave him. What does that mean for that information that he may have gotten from Maxwell?
So that means she's able to say things without any fear of reprisal or fear of anything else happening to her criminally. Now, of course, she is in jail for 20 years for some serious sex trafficking charges. And because of that, if you're in jail for 20 years, perhaps you want to say something that prosecutors may be more willing, or the president may be more willing to get you out of there a little bit sooner or completely in the coming weeks and months. So what she says is certainly should be taken by a grain of salt. But what she was saying it to Todd Blanche, who's the #2 at the Department of Justice.
Yeah, and speaking of that, how unusual is it for Todd Blanche, not only #2 at the Department of Justice, also President Trump's former personal lawyer? How unusual is it for that type of official to be so directly involved in this situation at this time?
It's a web of conflict of interests there, right? But he's not a prosecutor in this case, right? He's a political figure at the Department of Justice. If there were no FBI agents in the room, if there were no actual prosecutors to the case itself in the room when these conversations were going on, it's sort of up for debate in the legal community as to what can be done with that information, Gabe.
Gary Grumbach, our legal affairs reporter. Gary, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.